Hello, my name is Dr. Joyce Gomez, and I am an associate professor at California State University, Fullerton. Specifically, I'm in the Department of Literacy and Reading Education. And today it's my pleasure to talk to you about the following topic. Today we're discussing meaningful engagement with nonfiction text. Specifically, we're aiming to explore ways to support comprehension with our kiddos in the high school context. So here's a little bit more info about myself. I was born and raised in the Southern California area. I'm also a mom of two young girls. I completed my teaching credential at California State University, Fullerton. And when I completed my program, I began my teaching career in the Clark County School District, which is located in Las Vegas, Nevada. I taught elementary level grades such as first and second, but I was also a school site literacy specialist. I also did some work with the district, so supported literacy efforts with teachers across the broader Clark County School District. Currently, in my position as an associate professor at Fullerton, I teach in our graduate program, and we also have a minor. And in addition, my research pertains to social justice considerations in teacher education, as well as culturally responsive and sustaining approaches to RTI implementation, or really just data-driven processes broadly. So here's some information in case there are any questions I can answer. I have my email listed as well as my Instagram handle. So we're working toward the following learning goals today. The first is to identify some of the essential components of comprehension instruction in relation to reading nonfiction text. In addition, we're going to explore some strategies and approaches to fostering student comprehension in this area. So when we think about early reading processes, those really set the stage for students to engage in meaningful, in-depth comprehension at an independent level, right? So all of these work together, but they may have been mastered in earlier grades. So when students are at that like pre-K and kinder and first grade level, they're developing their phonological awareness as well as their phonics knowledge that allows them to decode and access different types of text, including when we're thinking about nonfiction text, that multisyllabic text. So that's a really important consideration because having those strategies allow students to really focus on really analyzing the deeper messages within the text as opposed to using all of that cognitive energy to decode the word. So we're always developing our comprehension knowledge and skills, even at those early primary grades. But all of these work in conjunction with one another to help students be successful. So that automaticity with decoding allows students to develop strong fluency, which again means that they're able to focus on the meaning of text. Also, with that is our oral language development, both receptive and expressive language. We're also thinking about their vocabulary and their listening skills. All of these work together as we, as a classroom community, are engaged with the content that we're accessing through that nonfiction text. So although we're going to be focusing on the topic of comprehension, I think it's also important to note that the process of reading and literacy broadly is really multifaceted. There's lots of things going on here. So recognizing that we also want to be mindful of any of these other factors that we think might be impacting students' ability to really focus on those comprehension elements, be it some difficulty decoding multisyllabic words in an expository text, or some difficulty tapping into vocabulary strategies that help them determine the meaning of unknown words, or some difficulty sharing their ideas and thoughts about the text through their oral language in, let's say, a whole group setting, or some difficulty listening to the content through, like, let's say, a lecture, in which case we have to consider like visual representations or kinesthetic opportunities to become engaged. So, all this to say that there are other factors that we're also mindful of when we're thinking about comprehension. So, to get us started, if you want to just on your own go ahead and write down some things that you already know about preparing students to develop their comprehension in the context of nonfiction text. Go ahead and write down what you already know about um, approaches, strategies, pedagogy, materials. What are some concrete principles that you're already very clear on in terms of comprehension of non fiction text? But also list what are some things you want to know? What are some things that you want to unpack? Some difficulties you've maybe come across in your classroom working with students? What are the things that you would like to explore and develop your own knowledge about in relation to this topic? So this is part of a KWL chart, and it's often used also in conjunction with nonfiction text in that it prompts our students to tap into that prior knowledge that they might have about a particular topic, whether it's reading an article about animals or looking at a textbook that depicts some information from um, our past or some historical elements that we're exploring. And it allows them to share what they already know about that given topic and allows them to kind of engage with that and sit with that for a bit. But also, we want to know what their wonderings might be at this point in time. How are we inviting them to become personally invested in the topic that we're going to explore together? At the end of our experience, we would invite our students to also map out what they've learned from this lesson, from this unit, from this read aloud, from this independent read. We want them to engage in that metacognitive process where they're not only focusing on what they've learned, but they're focusing on how they learn. And in these ways, we prepare students to become empowered, independent readers who are very aware of their own strategies and their own learning styles and preferences that will help them continue to effectively and independently engage with the text. So we can do that for ourselves right now too, right? We've mapped out what we know about teaching comprehension in terms of nonfiction text. We've written down what we want to know, and at the end of this um, experience together, we can also map out what we've learned today. There are several challenges that come with reading informational text. So DeWitt's and colleagues argue that if we want our children to be college and career ready, then they must have the knowledge and the skills necessary to read informational text. And many of us have probably encountered the tidbit that shows that in those early grades, a lot of students are learning how to read, but then that fourth grade mark kind of signals a transition where there's a heavier focus on students reading to learn. So through their engagement with multiple forms of text, be it magazines or online articles or textbooks or biographies, students are learning about the world around them. They're learning about history, they're learning about science concepts. And that is how we continue to refine our own knowledge as lifelong learners. And so that the skill sets that come with effectively engaging with informational text to draw from it the information that we need for particular purpose those become really important. But they're also uniquely different from just the process of learning how to read. When we're learning how to decode different types of text, when we're learning how to build our fluency, when we're learning how to expand our vocabulary. It's a really pivotal transition that continues to grow as our students, advance through K-12 and beyond. And so there are some prominent challenges that come along with that pivot, and that includes, in part, a demand for more and deeper prior knowledge. Because clearly, if we are engaging with a particular text that has tons of new information for us, that can be very overwhelming. So the same way that we might, and I'm making a generalization, maybe some of you might be well prepared to open up a medical journal. If you don't have a background in pre-med and you're not on that trajectory, you don't have a ton of reading under your belt in relation to that given topic, delving into a medical journal might feel a little overwhelming. There might be tons of vocabulary words or concepts or ideas in that magazine that are not part of the fabric of the content you've been learning on your own, right, in the past. And so jumping into that particular article or that text might be much more difficult than, let's say, you went online and searched for some reading in relation to your favorite hobby. Let's say you're really an avid quilt maker or an avid artist, or you are really into fitness. And so you delve into some articles that pertain to those topics, and you're right there with them. You're, of course, gathering new information, but it's interconnected to the information you've already brought with you to that text. And so that synthesis is much more smooth, creates much less cognitive dissonance, right? You're just ready to go and to engage in that text. So therein lies the excitement of, but also the challenge of engaging with informational text. There's the likelihood that the information that you're engaging with can be completely new and therefore just requires a lot more work and skills that we have to tap into. And as I mentioned earlier, there can be the possibility that students have less experience with informational text, especially if they're in those earlier grades, or even just where we're thinking about freshmen in high school. They're going to be in a different position than, say, our graduating seniors. And then also when we think about informational texts, we're discussing multiple text structures. There's so many that they're drawing from that are uniquely different from fictional texts. The structures are different, the formats are different. Even the different types of informational texts can have their own unique traits and characteristics and relatedly rules in terms of, engaging with them. And so those could pose some challenges if they're relatively new for a student. Also, we want to think about the growing digital text demand, right? That's new for a lot of us. That's new for us as a broader global community. But with that comes, again, its own set of rules and circumstances. And so we want to empower students to be mindful of these rules and strategies and structures so that they know how to navigate them as effectively as possible. So with that, we want to think about how we can build students' knowledge. And to clarify, this doesn't mean that we are not valuing the knowledge that our students are already bringing, right? So our students are going to bring with them tons of knowledge and tons of experience and tons of perspectives on different ideas. And as much as possible, we want to make those meaningful connections. So later we'll talk more about selecting culturally responsive and sustaining text. So it's not that we want to fill our students up with these like unique decontextualized topics or experiences, but rather we're just recognizing that when we are reading informational texts, especially if it's a completely new venture or curiosity, it's going to come with new information that we just don't have. Maybe that's the purpose, right, of reading that text. But there are ways that we can build knowledge and help build our students' knowledge in preparation for engaging with that text. So here are 3 different types of knowledge students need to comprehend informational text. The first is word knowledge. So if we know that there's going to be certain vocabulary words in the text that will be very pivotal to understanding the broader themes within that article, then we need to figure out how we can explicitly teach students that vocabulary so that they can hit the ground running as they read that article. So for instance, let's say you are thinking about changing the oil in your car. You've never done it before, and you want to read an article to figure out how to do it. If there are certain types of mechanical vocabulary in that text, you might want to highlight some of those words beforehand, look those up, write down those definitions, so that when you read the article, you can focus on the steps, the information that you need to draw from that article, specifically around changing the oil in your car. And you don't want those unique vocabulary words to serve as obstacles to your goal. So relatedly, we can preview text and present to students some explicit instruction on the vocabulary or some intentional opportunities for them to preview that vocabulary so that when they engage with more reading with that text, they can also, again, hit that ground running. They can also, we can also work with them to build text structure knowledge. So preparing students to have a better understanding of the different structures within expository texts, which are uniquely different from, let's say, like a fictional chapter book, right? Those are pretty easy transitions. We have our chapters and we just have a ton of text on a paper page. Here, with informational text, we might have photos, we might have captions, we might have headings and subheadings, and how can we prepare students to kind of navigate those features? And third, content knowledge. If we are, again, delving into a topic that's completely new to us, we might couple that with some other multimodal experiences. So for instance, if you're trying to change the oil in your car, you might not only read that article, you might also watch a YouTube video. You might also talk to a friend. So there are other things that we can do to help like solidify our knowledge of that article, to continue to build our comprehension of the topic or the content. So there are different ways that we can build this prior knowledge, including brainstorming. This allows us to activate that background knowledge and invite students to draw from their past experiences. We can create opportunities to build their conceptual or topical knowledge. And so this can include a range of activities or experiences, such as conducting an experiment before you delve into a text that addresses a particular science concept. This can include giving a brief lecture before students read text about a particular content area, or you can even conduct a read aloud where you read a particular text, maybe a related text, so they can continue to build a little bit more knowledge before they delve into the text on their own. The New York Times also shared different warm activities that you can use to engage students before they read nonfiction text. And this goes to the idea of really setting the stage, right? So before you do, like, rather than inviting students to do a cold read of a text that they've never experienced before, there are different ways that we can, again, activate that prior knowledge and set the stage for the content that we wish to expose our students to. And so here are a variety of ideas. This can include like drawing, asking for predictions on what they think the text is going to be about or what it's going to say, making something, trying an experiment, making a list of things, previewing the text, responding to a quote, taking a stand on a topic. So if the content is going to pertain to like something controversial, meaning there can be different perspectives shared, then maybe you can ask students to share like what they already know about a particular topic and what they feel before going into the text and what they feel coming out of the text. So we just want to really start to set the stage for that engagement and connection to what they're going to be reading about. We also, as I mentioned earlier, can make some of those ideas around text structure more explicit, thereby allowing students to know what they are and how to navigate them as they engage with them in the text. So we can use materials to introduce students to a topic or subject. We can be very intentional about the selection of text that we want to use to illustrate these types of structures. So for instance, if we're thinking about some nonfiction organizational patterns that include like something that includes a lot of description on a particular topic, or something that's very sequential, kind of going to that example of changing the oil in your car, or if we're talking about a concept that pertains more to like compare and contrast ideas or problem solution or cause and effect, we can select text that aligns with or illustrates those ideas, thereby allowing students to really see what that looks like in a text. We can also identify and discuss clue words that signal a text structure pattern. So for instance, if we're talking about sequence, we might use words, we might find language such as in this first step, or next, or afterward, or finally. So we can help students identify these structures within the text so that they know how to kind of organize all of that information as they engage with it. We can also discuss the relationships among the ideas in the paragraph, or develop sentence frames for writing about these relationships between the concepts. And so this also takes us to graphic organizers. So like if we were thinking about compare and contrast, we might invite students to map out some key ideas or words from the two items that they're comparing in a Venn diagram. So these graphic organizers offer these visual illustrations of text information that really helps students have a better understanding of the different ideas being presented in a book. So in this way, it's more visual. It can also be more hands-on if you, again, have students writing on this map, but also you can use like construction paper or post-it notes or other visual hands-on clues that allow them to really map out what exactly this information that's being presented is saying, and how the different ideas within the text are also supporting those main assertions or concepts. And so these visual cues really improve comprehension and allow students to really unpack some of the meaning from the text. We also talked earlier about the KWL chart. It's also a tool that helps students map out these key ideas and allows them to assess their own thinking and learning before they read, and then also after they read. So you want to tap into what they already know about something, what they want to know about something, and what they've learned. And relatedly, semantic mapping also allows us to create these visual representations of the ideas that we have or that we're formulating around the content, or even just questions that we have. If we can see missing components of a map and recognize that there's things that we don't understand and want to look into a little bit more closely. There's also ways that we can use text or the lecture component of a lesson to also help students make sense of the content. Pictorial input charts can be really helpful in this regard. So they involve creating an illustration related to a thematic unit. in real time. So what a teacher might do is trace very lightly with pencil or something really like dull to map out what we want to say. So we can see an example here for the water cycle. So if, let's say there's particular concepts about the water cycle that I want students to grasp. They're going to be doing some reading around the water cycle. And so I also want to create that lecture experience, but also want to anchor it with some of these visual cues. So I'll map out this entire chart with a light pencil. And then as I'm talking about these concepts, I can go ahead and trace my pencil with a thick marker or something else that's like very visually prominent as I talk about it. So I can talk about the concept of precipitation and how that's related to condensation and collection as I'm tracing my pencil markings here. So in this way, you're creating an experience that allows students to relate to the content. These are also really helpful in terms of supporting our emerging bilingual learners or multilingual learners to help couple that visual representation with the auditory element as well. And you can get students involved. So here you can see some younger students, but we can imagine what this might look like in a high school hallway or corridor as students become involved in mapping out their knowledge of particular concepts or ideas or vocabulary. So strategies and metacognition are also a really important part of this process. So these involve what Pearson describes as conscious and flexible plans that readers apply and adapt to a variety of texts and tasks. So by not only focusing on the content that they're learning, but the processes through which they engage with that learning, students then develop the tools that they need to then apply to another set of readings. So as they develop their awareness of how to think about or ponder before they engage with reading, to highlight the pieces of information that they are understanding, as well as the pieces of information they're not understanding, and figure out how to tap into those strategies that help them navigate the stuff that they don't understand, to then unpack it and master it before moving forward. Those are the types of behaviors that good readers do, right? If we were to read some correspondence that came in the mail and we're trying to understand like a bill or a legal document, we have to stop and think and reread and do all those things to make sure that we have a firm understanding of what's being communicated through that correspondence. And so by using those skills, we can prepare our students to then apply those same strategies to their reading of other texts, even beyond high school. So we want to set a purpose for reading. We want our students to understand that in addition to mastering the content from that textbook or that piece of literature, we also want them to understand how these strategies can help them in a variety of contexts. We also want them to know how to determine what is important. There can be chapters and chapters of text, but good readers know how to also identify the key pieces of information that are going to help them either to develop something, to produce something, to develop a stance on something, or to develop a project or a product. And we want students to know how to do that. We also want them to know how to summarize key pieces of information versus like retelling like a long list of random pieces of information. Like, how do these ideas connect to one another thematically speaking? We also want them to engage in question asking and answering. We want them to be curious. We want them to engage with the text in a very thoughtful and meaningful way. So again, through these approaches, we're empowering students to know what to do, what when they're reading, and especially if certain things don't make sense. So again, we want to set a purpose for reading. So there are different ways that we can do this, including reading closely, rereading, looking for important ideas, examination of text features, or aligning these topics with student interest. In terms of determining what's important, we can use the gradual release of responsibility model. We can explain the strategy that we're going to use. We can model the strategy multiple times. Next, we can invite the students to use the strategy, assuming greater levels of responsibility with it over time. Then we can offer student support with like a graphic organizer, collaboration, or guidance. And ultimately, we want to empower students to utilize these strategies when reading independently. So one example might be teaching students to summarize. Here we're determining the importance of particular pieces of information from the text. So we want students to identify what they already know about a topic. We want them to write keywords or phrases. We want them to know what the main ideas are, but also to map that out with evidence and reasons that support those main ideas that they've discovered from the text. And we want them to be prepared to present a summary of some of these important pieces of information, either orally or through some type of written or visual representation. So the way we would kind of map out these different steps for summarization can be applied to different contexts and with different text. Question asking and answering can also be a very powerful way of engaging students meaningfully with nonfiction text, and helping them recognize the different types of questions that might be part of that thinking and learning process. So when we think about QARs, or the question answer relationship, there are different levels of rigor across these types of questions. When we think about a right there question and in the text question, these are answers to questions that might be easily identifiable in the text itself. So if the question is, when did this historian write down information about XYZ? The student can find within the text a specific sentence that says, in the year 1945, so-and-so discovered or wrote down information about XYZ. So the student can easily highlight or circle where exactly in the text they found the answer to that question. Slightly related, but slightly different, is the in the text think and search type of question. This is where the answers to questions are in the text, but it's found maybe over several sentences or paragraphs. So for instance, let's say the student needs to identify the eating habits or behaviors of a grizzly bear. So they may not find a specific sentence that says the eating habits of a grizzly bear include X, Y, and Z. Maybe there's information sprinkled in the first paragraph and in the fourth paragraph and in the 10th paragraph that all pertain to that topic. And so helping students highlight those pieces of information and put that together. Now, these types of questions are uniquely different from in your head questions that require higher levels of inferencing, where the answer might not be something you can necessarily circle or highlight in the text. So some of these questions might be authoring you, where the questions aren't directly in the text, but you need to kind of think about what the author has told you and what you already know about the topic. So you might be able to infer key pieces of information about mammals based on what you've read about the grizzly bear. And then the on your own question is the questions that are not even in the text. You need to think about your personal experiences to the answer. So if in that text about bears, we're also reading about habits or behaviors that humans engage in that maybe endanger the wellness of the grizzly bear, given its impact on its environment. We can ask questions, uh, we can pose questions to our students to ask them to consider implications of deforestation or human impact on natural environments and conservation. These answers might not necessarily be in the text explicitly, but students can draw from the content that they've read about from the text about the grizzly to infer and contribute. Like that information can be part of their response and their thinking on that related topic. So we want to be intentional about preparing these types of questions for students so that they can engage with the content in very different and meaningful ways. And relatedly, we want students to be prepared to engage with those questions, even if we're not the ones who develop them. These questions might be part of the text or might be part of an exam or an assessment, but we want students to know what these different question formats are and what they look like and how they can use specific strategies to access the information they need to thoughtfully respond to these. So by helping them understand, like, this is information you're going to find specifically in the text, this is information you have to kind of step back and think about a little bit more deeply in relation to other readings you've done or other experiences you've had, you can empower them to know that there's no cause for frustration if the answer is not coming to them right away. There are different strategies and steps they can take to find that information. There's also two approaches for teaching strategies. One is through the direct instruction of these strategies and offering students a release of responsibility, or you can offer them a multiple strategy instructional approach. So ultimately, we just want to share with students that there are different ways that good readers can engage with text. And so ultimately, we want them to find strategies that work best for them, whether that's annotating text, highlighting text, writing notes about the text, turning and talking to friends about the text, previewing the text. All of these different things can be so helpful to each of us. And by offering students a multitude of tools that they can draw from, they can have confidence in knowing that they can navigate some of the trickier texts they engage with and ultimately still be successful in comprehending that information. So there are a variety of comprehension strategies that can be used in a narrative as well as informational text. Some that might be more unique to informational text might include determining what's important and summarizing. So I could, if I wanted to change the oil in my car, read an entire 300-page book on, that on information that is related to the task. But I don't necessarily have to. If my purpose is to just, like, very quickly, like today, figure out how to change my oil, then there might be a bit of scanning that I'm doing. I have to use the table of contents in that 300-page book to identify the unique sections that are going to talk about the questions that I have to know how to identify the pieces of information that I'm going to need. I need to know how to sequence that information so that my actions can then be sequenced in the correct order, right, for efficiency. And in that sense, informational text has some unique demands. Similarly, summarizing is really important. How do we draw from a text key ideas, and later how does that connect to other key ideas from other texts that we've read, perhaps on a similar topic, whether that's for developing a research paper or presentation or developing a solution to a problem. Reciprocal teaching is also a powerful way to enhance engagement with comprehension of nonfiction text. Here we have students focused on a particular assigned role or a strategy that allows everybody to have a unique uh, way to engage with the text, but also with one another. So it's collaborative and it involves student ownership of their specific text. So we can have somebody within a group who's in charge of developing and sharing predictions for that text. They can also facilitate those questions if other students want to share theirs as well. We can have a student who is tasked with doing a read aloud of that text while their classmates listen or follow along. We can have somebody who's in charge of clarifying key ideas. We can have someone who's in charge of asking questions or facilitating the discussion. And we can have someone who's in charge of summarizing key things that we've learned or key things that were discussed from this experience. And so you can also create differentiated experiences for students by being very intentional about what task you're assigning to which student. Or you can allow them to self-select, but there's a lot of different avenues that you can use with this. But ultimately, you want every student within the group to have ownership of their task and to be involved in the process of engaging with that material. And as we mentioned earlier as well, this engagement with informational text now includes information with online text, right? So with that, we want students to be critical consumers of that information, as well as the more traditional text that's like in a book or a magazine article. But importantly, if we're asking students to draw from sources as they develop a research project or presentation, we also want them to know how to navigate online spaces to vet different types of text to determine what is reliable text, what's a reliable source that I could draw from and utilize to support my argument. How do I determine which text to select in a search? How do I refine my search? And then how do I engage with the text that's online as opposed to on the page, given, the different format? So we can ask students to engage with their own set of analytical questions, such as who created the content? In other words, is that author a reliable source? Is it like a blogger versus um, a, a licensed authority or professional on a particular topic? Is it a peer-reviewed publication, or is it something that really anybody could kind of post, like in a social media space? Also, we want them to consider how the information was developed. Was like, so if we're thinking about like a peer-reviewed article, there's obviously a set of methods and criteria that's applied for its reliability and rigor, as opposed to, again, a blog or something a little bit more informal in nature. We also want them to ask why. What is the purpose of this text, as well as when the information was developed? So how that might impact the reliability of it, given potential new information that may have come about more recently. We also want them to, of course, identify the message within that text and also what are the next steps that they would need to take to further their learning or to apply this knowledge to another context. Also related to navigating text online, we want students to know how to use search terms, how to develop knowledge of a homepage and menus, how to identify links to related topics. We also want them to be able to evaluate information and to synthesize information as they access this info across different potential sources. In terms of comprehension within the internet, again, we want to set the purpose, tap into prior knowledge, tap into inferential reasoning, and encourage students to engage in self-regulated reading. So with that, again, developing that metacognition around what they're doing and how to offer them that intentionality as well. So, helping them in setting goals as they engage with the text, monitoring their thinking and learning and their understanding of the text, allowing them to self assess their own comprehension, showing them how they can reread and ways they can reread to further develop their understanding, and more broadly speaking, how to address any breakdowns in their comprehension. So they have to be able to identify those those periods and how to tap into strategies that help them navigate those. With that, we also want to be very intentional about the types of text that we select, especially if our goals around like really meaningful engagement. So with that, we want to develop or select or utilize text that's engaging, relevant, and accessible. So when I think about engaging, that can be text that really invites students to jump into that text. Um, so this can go beyond our traditional course textbook, and we could draw from memoirs, biographies, newspaper articles, or magazine articles, just to name a few. So really broadening our scope of text, really broadening our conceptualization of what quote unquote counts as text, and drawing from those different sources of information and utilizing those as part of our instructional curriculum. We also want our text to be relevant. So there are different ways we could think about that. One way can be like a very, just like logistically speaking, like stuff that really resonates with students' experiences and tasks and goals. So even just the mail that we get in that mailbox, as good readers, we know that we need to be able to open up and understand the the that correspondence that we're receiving, whether it's a bill or a legal document, or information about our house or our rental property, or information about um, like maybe our children's school schedule. Like as adult, uh, long standing readers, we know that there's lots of different types of text that we have to effectively engage with on any given day. So relatedly, we want our students to be able to engage with those different types of text that they engage with every day. And that can be billboards, or it can be social media posts, or it could be also the letters that their families get in the mail, if that's part of their role, as part of those families too, like helping one another make sense of the information that's coming in through the mail. So all that has to do with what we learn about our students as individuals and as a school community. So making sure we're developing spaces for that so that we can select and draw from text that's relevant to them. That also means developing a better understanding of our students' intersecting social identity markers, including um, culture, race, the languages that they speak, their socioeconomic experiences, gender identity, faith. These are all different ways in which students see the world and see themselves. And so, how are we selecting text that reflects and values those experiences that they're bringing to the classroom? How do we make sure that the text that we're selecting is culturally relevant and responsive and sustaining? How do we make sure that some of the information also that students are already actively engaged with, the stuff that's super interesting to them, the stuff that they're super passionate about, is also part of our decision-making process as we're selecting text. And finally, we also want to make sure that we're thinking about accessibility. And that can be in terms of socioeconomic conditions, but that can also be in terms of um, ability. And so, how do we make sure that students have access to different forms of text, both inside the classroom as well as outside the classroom? So Newsela is one source that allows us to identify or locate differentiated text. They offer different types of articles that feature the same content, but through different, for instance, like Lexile. So students can engage with the same information through text that is accessible to them. So this could allow us to really be very thoughtful when we're developing small group experiences or small group discussions. Also, we want to invite students to engage with text in classrooms or also outside of classrooms. So sources such as PBS, Learning Media allow students to access different types of informational text. So just to navigate this very quickly, it offers different informational text topics that are related to different standards and strands. You could select by grade, but you can also select by a source. So it has videos as well as documents and web pages and so on and so forth. So just thinking about how we might draw from these different materials, share them with our students and share them with families as well, so that our students can be avid readers inside the classroom and outside the classroom. So here's an exercise that you can also engage with on your own to try out and apply some of these concepts. So I've linked here and I'll share in the slides an article from the National Geographic just as a sample. And ask yourself some of the questions that were posed throughout today's session, including how will you tap into students' prior knowledge about the text? How will you set the stage for this article? How will you, like, in other words, build that engagement and that excitement? What vocabulary would you preview and how would you present it? How will students organize their thinking as they read? What questions will facilitate your class discussion? How will you organize those? And how will students showcase their learning about the article throughout the lesson, but also afterwards? So we could think about assessment. How will they share their knowledge and thinking? So I invite you to try that as you think about building your own classroom experiences surrounding like meaningful engagement with nonfiction text. Also, if you'd like to map out some of the things you've learned from this session, what were some things that were new to you, but also thinking about what you still want to know more about. So I thank you so much for listening today. Again, here's some of my contact information if you have any questions. But I hope you all enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you. Bye bye.